really sad and everything. But suddenly
he remembered their stories, right, about Snow White and
exactly
the seven dwarfs.
and now Johannes
And then Johannes
will maybe help us
Yeah.
to clarify that.
Thank you. Yeah. As I said, I'm Johannes. I'm a data scientist at Celebrate Company. We've got an office here in Hamburg. Actually, it's not that far, at Baumwall. I'm also a Hugging Face fellow. That's why I wear this shirt today. It's like a nice emoji. Yeah, I lead a CV study group on the Discord. You can hop in if you want. And today, I want to tell you a story. So basically, you might know the story of Snow White, right? And I really like to create images with generative AI, right? So you will see a lot of Stable Diffusion images. And because I like to create it so much, we get a quick run through the original story, okay? So probably you know there was a young princess, really beautiful, but her mother died in childbirth. So her father married again, but the new queen, she was evil, right? An evil witch, basically. And she wanted to be the most beautiful in the whole country. So she had to get rid of Snow White. Luckily, Snow White can escape, runs into the forest, runs, until she comes to a hut and falls asleep. Wakes up again, 7 dwarfs around her, and she goes like, probably good enough. Queen won't find me here, right? Well, she's wrong. Queen finds her, disguises as an old woman, sells some apples. One is poisoned. Snow White bites into the apple, falls dead. Or so you think, until a beautiful prince comes along on his mighty steed, right, kisses her, and she wakes up again. Oh, so great. And yeah, he takes her away to his kingdom, and they lived happily ever after. That's the original story, right? And also like, well, happily ever after, but what about after some years, Snow White gets bored? You know, it's like living in a castle for ages, just sitting there doing stuff like, I don't know, reading books, which is nice, right? But after some years, you get bored. So she thinks, what could I do with my life? And she decides to enroll into the Fairy Tale University, right? A really nice university building they have there. It's like the best university in the whole fairy tale country. And she decides to study data science, of course. So now she studies a lot, she works hard, and in some winter, she decides to take a break and go and visit her old friends. So she packs her stuff, right, gets all stuff in the backpack, and visits her old friends, the dwarfs, in their hut. So who are the dwarfs? That was the most fun part to create, actually. So there are Diggy, Peppy, Glimmer, Gizmo, Flint, Picker, and Russell, right? Those are the 7 dwarfs, not like in Disney. We forget about Disney here, right? As a German, I like the Grimm fairy tales better than the Disney fairy tales. So, yeah, so that's the dwarfs. But what do the dwarfs do all day? You might know that they work in a mine. So in the mine, they get a lot of stones, gemstones, coal, whatever they find, right? So they take the stones they found, and then they have to sort it. They have to sort it to crests, basically, all these boxes here. And then they sell it off to specialized vendors. So they've got like one box for ruby, they've got one box for diamonds, one box for, I don't know, topaz, whatever. And yeah, then they give it to the ruby vendor, to the whatever vendor. But they've been doing this for ages, right? So like Snow White was sitting in a castle, they've been just doing this stuff for ages, and they get bored. And so the quality declines, right? They're just like, oh, yeah, this is probably this is that. And not every dwarf is as good as the other dwarf at like sorting stuff. And they tell this to Snow White, and she's like, wait, I study data science. I might be able to help you. You know, I've heard about this thing. It's simply called voting. Okay. The dwarves, they don't know much about democracy or whatever. So voting, that's something new for them. There's something called hard voting. So Snow White takes a stone up there, the red stone, says like, okay, what is this? And every dwarf just says like, oh yeah, it's a ruby, amethyst, ruby, garnet, amethyst, ruby, ruby. Then you just collect the votes, say, okay, 4 times ruby, 2 times amethyst, 1 times garnet. So we say it's a ruby. That's the winner here. That's hard voting. Pretty simple, right? data science is very simple, as you see. Now there's another kind of voting we call soft voting. So she says, tell me again, what is this and how sure you are and what else could it be? Right, so everyone goes like, okay, out of these three, yeah, this is the percentage. Then we average over all these. And then again, we get a ranking. And we can say, okay, Ruby is still the winner. Okay, so the dwarfs are not that bad, actually. But some are quite unsure, and some are a bit like, So with the soft voting, you get a more detailed look at the whole stuff. Now, when you study data science, you also learn about programming a bit, right? So Snow White goes to her laptop, and she, of course, knows the sklearn package, scikit-learn. I guess most data science know it, right? One of the best packages, maybe the data science package in Python. And you can also do voting there. So you create some classifiers, whatever, have some mock data, X and Y, and then you just go there, voting classifier, you put in your estimators, blah, 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 whatever they are, and then you just say voting hard or soft. And that is it. In just a few lines of code, you can fit and then predict it. Okay, so that's like really simple. And what we're talking about here is called ensemble learning, right? So it's like a lot of classifiers together. And these could also be like 7 decision trees, like the dwarfs. The dwarfs are basically decision trees. They say, it's probably this because it doesn't look like this or that. So every dwarf can be seen as a decision tree, and you could put in 7 decision trees. But it gets more sophisticated. So there's bagging, right? So bagging is when you take some stones out of your original data set, right? And you take some stones, so not the whole thing, but some stones, and you give these stones to the dwarfs. All right, and you do this one by one, basically, because when the first dwarf is finished, like looking at them, learning from them, he puts the stones back. Then the next dwarf gets some stones, so we can always put them back. So they can actually overlap these subsamples, we call them, right? And then every dwarf learns from these stones. And so every dwarf has seen some different stones, and they all have like a different idea for classification. And then again, you show them like the red stone and are like, okay, what is this? And they make a guess. And then you average over all their outputs, basically. That's called bagging. And for this averaging here, you can actually use voting, for example, as we've seen before. So you can combine it, right? Bagging and voting. And of course, you can do it in sklearn. Again, really simple. It's just this one line, the bagging classifier. And you can also like tell them which estimators to use, but by default, it will use decision trees. So here it uses 10 decision trees. You got some mock data, and that's all you need for it, actually. Okay, there's one more thing. That is called boosting, especially ADA boost. Okay, so boosting and bagging are like the most popular ensemble techniques, actually. And ADA boost is a bit more complicated because we have our data set, and we give that to the first dwarf. The first dwarf makes a guess, is about 80% right. Okay, so now we know what he knew and what he didn't know, so we update weights. And the weights are basically attached to every stone. We now know, okay, this one is a hard example because the dwarf was wrong about it. So that is more important for the next dwarf. And we see samples where you say, okay, the dwarf was right about it, so it's not that important for the next dwarf. So we just basically attach this label to every stone in the data set, and then with this weighted data set, we give it to the next dwarf, which also makes a guess, and it's like 70% right. Okay, so basically every dwarf sees sees the same data, but with different weights. So again, all the dwarfs learn a bit different. Some are better than others until we get to the last dwarf. He also knows some stuff, right? Okay, and then there's one more step involved into boosting because we know how good they are, right? If you see, okay, the one with 90%, he is like the best. So he gets most to say in the final vote. The ones that are better just get a higher weight in the end vote so that we can be more sure about their performance. Again, sklearn, really quick, ADA boost classifier. There are other boosting techniques, for example, XG boost, which is really popular, works a bit different. But yeah, other boost is really nice to show. That's why I showed it here. And again, just one line really. And that's all you need from the sklearn package. Okay. And then there's one last thing I want to show you, and that is basically ensembling the ensemble, right? So when you have your boosting ensemble method and then your bagging ensemble method, you can create predictions from both of them, right? Give them the data, you get predictions. And with those predictions, you can train another classifier. So here it's Snow White, for example. And we give her the labels as well, right? And then we just say, okay, now Snow White can learn from these. So you can combine them even further, right? You can ensemble the ensemble, as I said, to get even more accuracy. Or sometimes this gets a bit compute intensive, but really in the age of like large language models and everything, most stuff of that you can run on CPUs, right? So it's really like low key. Yeah, and of course that's also an sklearn. Again, you have your estimators, you can just stack them, then you define the final estimator with logistic regression, and that is pretty much it. Yes, thank you.
No questions, of course.
No
But in the
questions.
break, maybe you have some.